Actually, it's 1:08. Today is, let me get my agenda. Mark it. Today is Tuesday, November 13th, 2018, and this is a Marquette Township Board budget work session. And a little bit after 1, we're going to be talking about Public Works and then possibly General Fund. So Randy, if you do roll call.
Excused are Trustee Everson, Trustee Marks, and Treasurer Johnson at this time. Trustee LaRue.
Here.
Trustee Wiegand.
Here.
Secretary is here, and Supervisor Durant.
Here.
Staff present is Manager Gerard and Superintendent of Public Works Kirk Page, and Accountant Lois Stonehouse will be here.
Thanks. Any public comment? You want to add anything, Lisa? No? Okay. Just want to give you the opportunity. Okay, policy discussion, consideration, and development. We left off with a lot of dangling participles, as my English teacher would say. Does anybody have a preference as to where we go? We kind of left our stormwater management. We were looking for money on that and to see if we could separate that out. We had talked about the capital improvement plan. We did the regular budgets. We talked about the water improvements. So, anybody have a preference? Any specific questions maybe you want to get out of the way first, or?
Well, I think we ended on stormwater and wanted to know how much money we actually had there, which is around $40,000 in my estimation.
Lost Lois.
But we have about $40,000 in stormwater that was collected from the wastewater many years ago.
And some of that was maintaining it. There's actually more in that fund, but it's coming and going back and forth. So that's discretionary, if you want to use that term.
But the cash on hand
with.
that we would have available is around $40,000.
Ms. Lois, we'll put you on the spot right away. Can we guesstimate that the stormwater balance that we have to play with or to use is about 40,000? That sounds about right?
40 or 42,000.
42, somewhere in there, okay. Just we have that kind of set aside.
And Trustee Wiegand's gonna ask a question, it don't look like that, but it's actually a lot higher, but there's deposits and things in there that aren't really ours. It's gonna be coming and going, because we have to pay that back to the developer when they're done. So that's why that account looks a lot higher than we actually have in there. Is that a question you're gonna have?
That's close, but the investments, the $44,387.31 in that account, or in that fund, is that CDs? Where is that?
That's an earning question.
That's gonna be a treasurer question.
Yeah.
So
It should be. Some of it's
probably
savings.
short-term.
I think they lowered it to about 6 months.
3 months.
Because if we
3
wanted
months?
to-
Some are 3 months.
Some are 3 now?
Yep. Well, the short, those kinds that are the in and outs, the relatively short in and outs are in short-term CDs, but everything else is in at least a 6-month investment. And they're laddered, so there's always one that's coming up in case you need cash, to access.
Usually Erna will give us that breakdown at the end of the year. How much is invested in this bank, what the interest is, and what the term is. Or does that come from you, Lois? On the investments?
That's readily available.
Okay, usually we get that by the end of the year. It's probably a good thing to have now.
Well, we've been trying to keep them reasonably short because of the fluctuations in the interest rates, and we want to be in a position that if the interest rates do and go up, we can reinvest relatively quickly for a better return on the investments. Pretty
Maybe,
low right now.
maybe for next year's budget session, that could be part of the packet. We should probably know.
Well, we get it every month, though.
No, I mean, Ernie's, I guess it comes from Ernie. It was a full page breakdown, and it said, like Range Bank and Wells Fargo, and it had all the places we have the investments. It tells you what the interest rate was, the term, and the balance. It might have even been a legal sheet.
Yeah, it's a
We
legal
had
sheet.
that
That's
once
probably,
before.
yeah, that's probably an internal that Ernie keeps as the treasurer.
Unless it's not,
Well, Dulcie would have it. You know, Ernie and Dulcie would both have it. Dulcie, you know, the deputy treasurer is the one that on a daily basis actually
Deals with it.
monitors that and addresses it. But that probably is being maintained by Dulcie, most likely.
It's on our document site.
Yep.
You can download it anytime.
Yeah. It's just not something that's been a typical report to the board. You know, it's an internal document, but certainly can be. You know, as Lois said, it's all available. You know, it's all in our system.
anything on that?
Yeah, that wasn't really my question. My question is when I'm looking at this treasurer's report for September, and we're at stormwater, so let's just stay at stormwater. And I can understand the disparity between 76,000 and change and actual 43,000 and change, that there's some $33,000 that are out there in deposits. I can understand that. And then you go down and you look at, there's investments under the stormwater fund for 44,000, which makes the whole thing about cash on that is about 120,000. Take your $30,000 out, there's still $90,000 there that we don't really have earmarked for anything. We don't really have anything to do. It just sets it.
That should be the difference for the contractor deposits, wouldn't it be?
No, the total right now is 120, or at the end of September was $120,431. We already said that there was some $33,000 that is in deposits. So if you back that out, it still comes out to like $87,000 and change.
I think 33 is low.
Yeah, I think,
Last time it was
think-
at
Well,
least
most of it
70
is
the last
deposits.
I think Myers had a $30,000
Yeah.
deposit.
Yeah.
Well, here's the treasurer.
Here's the answer, man.
You would know.
I was gonna pull up and see
Well,
what
that's
you,
one.
what you were looking at. September's, what, financial?
Well, that's the last one we got, was September's treasurer's report.
Yes, that's the last one we have.
Turn his mic on.
I'll let you get set down first, Ern.
Go out and come back in?
No, it's just a general question on how we figure out what we're gonna do with that cash that's laying there.
We went back into stormwater.
You people make that determination.
Yeah, I understand that, but it doesn't look like we make that decision very often, because
No.
once we get out of stormwater, there's a lot of accounts that have a lot more than that, and I'm just wondering why we're not doing something productive with that.
Good question.
Well, and the,
So my question is, in the stormwater fund,
Okay.
we show ending balance, which is cash on hand, of $76,044. And I understand that some of that is in deposits that we have to give back to the builders.
No.
No?
that part isn't?
That's right. That's my understanding. That's not part of the deposits, that.
So this is $76,000, $76,044 is,
Yeah, I was just gonna pull it up so we could look at it.
I think Lois is going to get the information right now.
Okay. No, Lois went out to get it.
Yeah. Lois is going out to
So,
get
we're going
it.
to get the documents.
We got $44,000 investment. That's a money market on that. That's the only thing it is.
I'm asking about this up here.
That's just cash. That's just
That has
cash.
nothing to do with the deposits.
No, that's just cash.
So that cash with the investments, we
You got
have
$120,000.
$120,431 sitting in that fund.
Right, as of right now.
Lois is here back now.
You look at the, any revenue or expenditures, if you have expenditures that comes out of cash.
Okay.
That's it, so.
Okay, Lois, so what's the,
As of the end of October, cash and investments were $118,825, but the customer deposits were $71,302.
But
So that brings you to
our treasurer says that that's not part of the 118.
Is the 71 part of the 18?
Yes. It's all there.
Yes,
Oh, okay, I was wrong.
Yeah.
I was wrong.
and out of that deposit are expenses that we incur to review, inspect, issue the permits.
We're just showing what's available.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to tell you where the water.
What'd you
where
say the
money goes.
deposits were, Lois?
118.
71,302.
71,302. Okay.
So that's, 118 isn't,
So the point
That's
is,
there.
it's a liability, basically. It either goes to expenses or it goes back to the developer. So
I guess
the only excess money that we've got. would be
We have
that-
some, we have
that 40,000.
excess money there, but part of that total bill is what goes back to the developers.
Correct. So we're back to the 40,000 that you started talking about in the beginning.
So we clarified with her that it was about 40,000 in discretionary money that was part of the beginning when the fund was set up, that we could use.
That was before my time.
That we could use.
Well, it's discretionary on from the standpoint that that's what we draw on when we have to do the analysis. We hire the engineer to evaluate the plans that are coming in, and we use that money for purchase services.
No, that comes out of the other, the 70,000.
Wait, that comes
Yeah,
out of
that's the
70.
deposits.
Okay.
That's what that's for. This
Yeah.
should be money from the beginning.
Yeah, the original transfers on the wastewater fund, I forget the exact number, 60,000, 70,000, something like that.
Originally.
Yeah, we spent something like 23,000 to actually develop the stormwater management ordinance. And
I
the
have
original
no
intent
idea what
was-
that
The original
was before
intent
my
was
time.
to establish a utility where we would go out and be constructing
Yeah.
stormwater infrastructure. And that would be the beginning of that, so that 40,000 that was left over would be put into that. But if we were to do that, we'd have to establish a utility, which meant that we would have to have charge fees.
Yep. That's the way I
So-
understood it.
Initially, we were thinking of doing that, but legally, I mean, it can be done, but it's pretty difficult, especially right at that particular time period, because that's when basically states were getting sued. Because a lot of cities have actually, they had built infrastructure over time, okay? They had spent money without a stormwater utility. So then to establish it after the fact is pretty difficult, if not impossible in their case. But in our case, we would have been starting new. But after looking at all the information that we gathered in the report and looking at our own situation, it just didn't seem practical to do that. Because we thought, okay, we'd already started, we've been working with, we had established drain districts where the drain commissioner had authority. Okay, so basically it was like on-site retention. And that was primarily for all the commercial development. But the reason we did the study was because the majority of the development, the new development, was occurring outside the drain districts. So we thought, okay, we could do it ourselves. But in the end, what would be different? We'd have to incur a lot more debt, we'd have to charge more fees. So we tried to approach it from the angle of beefing up what existed, which is basically the drain commissioner. So we got basically the same ordinance, maybe a little bit stricter in some areas. And plus, it's support for the drain commissioner. When he tells people, well, you can't do that. Okay, you have to make changes. So our own ordinance says you have to abide by this ordinance, so. Not to say we can't do it in the future, but, it hasn't happened yet.
Well, and we can decide, like Ernie said, we can decide what we want to do with that, sorry.
And if you were to
I
establish
just
a
want to leave it there.
utility, this will be your first expense, to pay that back before you do anything. But until you do that, then you should either pay it back or leave it for the future, or I would definitely, if you want to spend money, it should be in wastewater, but you can't get much of 40,000 other than possibly a plan to do something. And there probably should be an overall plan for the area of concern, but all we're doing is regulating, saying, well, basically you can't discharge any stormwater, essentially. So, and we try to enforce that, and it's working, that part's working pretty well. The problem arises in Trowbridge Park, which really, I won't say it doesn't apply, but Trowbridge Park is basically 75% in the Badger Drain District. And the Badger Drain was basically to serve the district, which is primarily 75% in Trowbridge Park. So all these ditches that everybody's concerned about were actually part of the Badger Drain. So it was designed to accommodate stormwater in the Badger Drain District. So if that's not working, and you want to do something different, then it might be worth spending some money to plan on exactly what you want to do.
Well, and you have, you know, the board has referred to the planning commission, I believe I remember correctly, you've referred, following the meeting with the road commission, you referred that to the planning commission for consideration of amending our ordinance to include the residential, and there would be some expense to do that. And that's where the money would come from.
So do we
I say leave it there and we'll move forward.
decide next year if we want to do something with it? Unless anybody else has any other,
Well, I would suspect you're gonna have something back from the planning commission probably by year end.
Yeah.
All I was
At least you
inquiring
can, you
about,
can't, or, you know, something.
all I was inquiring about is the general practice of what those fund balances were all about, and why they're sitting there and why we haven't done anything with them. I agree that $44,000 is not a significant amount, and that should probably stay right there, but there's other balances and other funds that I question why we do some of the things we do. But we'll get to them in a minute.
that's fine. We can jump out of this. This is just where
No,
we
I'm good.
left
Stay right in
off.
stormwater, it's fine. Wrap it up.
There isn't much more to wrap up.
Yeah, that's about it. That was really the only issue we brought up. We kind of wanted to know the balance. That was the big thing. Is there extra funds from prior actions, or do we use all of that? So now we have that answer. So we can, unless there's something else with stormwater, we can go on. Okay? Put that aside then. What's next? You want to look at next? Just pick an account, or did you have specific
I
questions,
think
Dave?
wastewater, I think we kind of settled water somewhat, I'm thinking. Wastewater would be next.
That had some of its own issues. Well, we've got, one of the questions too on wastewater was the balance. I think we need the same kind of explanation as to why do we have that kind of money sitting there if we don't have any proposed projects? And if we do, what are they, how are they gonna be funded?
Well, that was why I started with stormwater, because I figured we'd get to wastewater, and my question with what wastewater is we've got that balance, and it looks like, we've got $731,000 in change in CDs or investments out there someplace, and totally, we've got 1.5, just shy of $1.6 million sitting there, but yet we approve a CIP request, and they do it over a year or two. Why do we, if we approve a CIP request, why don't we just take it out of that fund if it's a reasonable amount of money? Instead of the end result of improving all, and initially when we had the CIP request in front of us, it was gonna significantly take up change the rates for wastewater. And we backed that down on the CIP approved list. So it makes a minor change in the wastewater, but I don't understand why we don't do something with that money besides let it sit there. And I'm not saying we should spend the whole thing. I'm saying that there should be something we can do with those funds to offset the rate increases that's anticipated for those specific funds. And when you look at we'll stick with the wastewater for now, but that's just a lot of money sitting there, and even the 3-month operating on wastewater is, 3-month operating on wastewater comes out to $177,691.
No, actually, it's 227,338, I believe.
Well, the average,
Yeah.
what I did is, we got an average of a 4-year average, and the 4-year average
Okay.
brings 3 months operating up to 177,691.
This year's budget was 227,338, though I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
You're just averaging the four years.
And I would think that would be a better way to do it, is on an average, because you don't have such a knee-jerk reaction to something that happened last year or something.
I'd rather stay on the high side though, just to be safe.
Well, I can understand that, but pick a number, pick $300,000.
Yeah,
That
but we
still
still have
leaves us
plenty of
with-
money.
That still leaves us with 1.2, almost $1.3 million sitting there that is not earmarked for anything.
You know, you've got two things with the enterprise funds, particularly water and wastewater. You have two things that you need to consider. You know, certainly there's a lot of money sitting there, and that's pretty much intentional. But, you know, what you're talking about now, that 3-month operating reserve, that's just to cover the cost of operating the system, presuming nothing occurs. Day-to-day operation, just general operation, that's what it would take to keep you going for 3 months. The other piece of the pie that you need to consider, and again, it's a board decision in terms of what your comfort level is how do you accommodate something happening? You know, you need to have somewhat of a reserve fund for an unanticipated event that would occur, because you can't be in a position where you can't provide water and you can't provide wastewater services. I mean, the office can close for 3 or 4 days or for a week, and it's not gonna hurt a whole lot. But folks with fire and water and wastewater, those have to be continuously operating. You know, so that's where you set your comfort level. You know, you can calculate your 3 months, you know, operating and set that aside, but then you need to evaluate where you want to be on an unanticipated event basis. You know, does that need to be $1 million? No, I don't think so. But most of the time when that happens, we have to bring in outside resources who want to be paid. You know, they've got staff they have to pay, and they want their payment now. So that's a it's a comfort level decision the board needs to make in terms of that part of it.
We used to say every time, if you get a freeze, just get a backhoe over there and start digging at $10,000 just to get them there and start.
Well, you have mobilization costs and you have those kinds of things, but certainly, you know, 1.7 is a healthy amount, you know, and I understand the issue that board members have when you get stopped in the grocery store or whatever and ask, you know, why are you talking about raising rates when you got $1.2 million sitting in your stormwater fund? Well, the answer is for the same reason that we're not in the situation that the city is, for a 20% increase over the next 3 years, each year for 3 years, and Ishpeming increasing direct by 50%, and those kinds of things, because they don't have the reserves. And that's what Raftelis just stood up and told them at the meeting, is you do not have adequate reserves to accommodate your needs should there be an event. You know, and that's why they're raising the rate 20% a year for the next 3 years. Spread over, you know, over 3 different utilities, but still, you know, that's the reason. And, you know, and that's the answer that I give when people ask me that, is it's our emergency fund in case something occurs, to make sure that we keep providing the service to you when you want it, how you want it.
In all the studies we've done, has anybody recommended what our?
No, it's never even been discussed. The 17 years that I've been here, the board has never had that discussion about what the comfort level is, so it's just continued to build and to build and to build.
And I agree with the manager. I mean, yes, we should have something there for the comfort level, and certainly the start of the comfort level is the 3-month operating. But once you decide that we have a 3-month operating there, and everything after that is in the event of some catastrophe that would happen, unforeseen circumstances that require us to go in and replace some portion of the sewer project. And I think it's nearly $1.6 million is way, I think that's way too much money, and it seems difficult to support a rate increase, or especially a rate increase for capital improvement projects, when you've got those kind of funds sitting there. And for example, the $85,000, no, I'm sorry, the $60,000 for the generator and the lift station. Do we really need to put that in? I mean, do we need a capital improvement project approved for it? Yes. But do we need to factor those funds in so that we raise the rates to collect it? I don't think so. We could take that money right out of that fund we have there and approve it and go ahead and do it, but we don't need to raise the rates because of it.
I think, and I asked Lois this earlier, we didn't raise rates last year, I believe, in wastewater, or did we raise them?
I think a
Raise
couple of
rates.
years.
Couple of years.
We didn't raise them last year, and I think we still.
Well, the year before as well, because the Public Works was under directive from the board to not increase, build a budget that does not increase rates.
I think we reduced the rates a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I think we increased money even last year without a rate increase, so,
Well, the reason, could I?
yeah.
The reason that we've got all that money there is we have been budgeting, we have been planning for the future, we have identified projects that need to be done, and this particular spreadsheet doesn't have the total on there, but it's a pretty large total. And I think you're absolutely right, we could go ahead and actually do our project. But when you do a big project, and certainly there's enough money to do a big project, but when we have, for whatever reason, done a big project, then that really reduces that reserve fund,
Yeah.
which is fine. I mean, I agree, it doesn't have to be that big. But the way to deal with that is to go ahead and do some of these projects. Even phase one of Grove and, Grove Street
No, and
would be a way to start.
my point is that those are not approved CIP projects. And in order for those to be approved, we need a whole lot more documentation than we have, in my opinion. That's why we decided not to include them in this year's budget for CIP requests. The approved CIP requests we got, and I don't remember what they were for wastewater exactly, I know there's a generator in there, and I think that's about it for the,
Everything else off.
okay? But there's a reason the rest of them didn't get put on there. It wasn't because of the funding issue, it was because there wasn't justification for them. And the same thing in water. The only difference between that and water, and we can touch on water when we get there, is we don't have the operating cushion that we would like to have because we use it all for South Vandenboe. But certainly in wastewater, we have a big enough cushion that I don't think we need to see a rate increase. If you took the rate increase out of the wastewater portion of the budget, what would that mean? What would that do in dollars and cents? How much of that would have to come out of that $1.5 million for the year?
To neutralize the proposed rate increase?
Yeah, because we took, if the $60,000, if we funded the $60,000 directly out of this wastewater fund, the totals under the available fund, and the only other thing you have in there is I think there was a flat rate increase of $1.
Not in
Volume
wastewater
rating.
now.
It was water.
Okay, so there's just the volume rate, and it was minimal. It was like 13 cents or something.
For water, yeah.
No, for wastewater,
Wastewater was 80 cents.
80 cents, okay. But it started out to be $2 and some odd cents, and we took the bunch of CIP requests out of there, and we took it down to whatever it is
Like
now.
94 cents.
My point is how much cash does that represent over the year? And and that funded the CIP for the generator.
So what would it take to bring the increase to zero, basically?
What would it take to bring the increase to zero and just fund the generator for the lift station
Out of reserve.
this
it back to
year?
what it
Just take
was.
it out of reserve and just do the project and be done. We still need to approve the CIP request, and that's some of the heartburn I have with just leaving the CIP request with part of the budget and just, I guess they're approved because we approved the budget. I think the board needs to specifically approve each CIP request, and once they're approved, we don't need to look at them every year unless they're gonna be amended. But an approved CIP is an approved CIP, and then we don't wanna hear about it anymore unless you wanna amend the CIP. But I think the board needs to look at each one of those and approve them or not approve them based on their own merit. I mean, we already decided that we're gonna do the generator and the wastewater, but I think we need to have a specific board action to approve that. And
We can, I don't see why can't.
Well, that's when you adopt
It's
the
always
budget.
been part of the
When you
budget.
adopt the budget, then it approves. isn't it?
You come to a,
but they come back every year.
Well, no, what I'm saying is the way you would do that basically is through your budget process. You approve it in the budget process, and then you have your public hearing, and then you formalize, you adopt the formal budget. That's your action to authorize going forward with the project.
Okay, then I would take my question further. If whatever we approve for CIP requests this year, they will return again next year and be looking for approval again. Even if we didn't start funding them this year, they will return next year on the budget. And if they've already been approved, why do they return?
Why are we gonna talk about this generator again next year?
Well,
We're gonna approve it now, right?
if the entire project, let me see if I'm understanding what you're asking. And the way this works is that if it's a project, let's say the patrol car in the general fund, break that over 2 years, because it's about a $60,000 investment. So you break that over 2 years. You don't deal with it twice. You deal with it once, and then it shows up in the budget because you got the second part budgeted in the 2020 budget. So you'll have half of it showing in 2019, and then you'll have another half, that gets pulled aside, then you'll have another half in the 2020 budget, and once that's approved, you don't see it anymore. Because then it's purchased in '21.
There's a difference between what you're saying, though, and it's what's gotten us in this problem that we're facing, is that over the years, these numbers of money, 60,000, 20,000, had been amortized, is what they ended up being,
Yeah.
for sometimes 15 years, but that money disappeared on different
Got
projects.
reallocated, yeah.
Yeah, so that's part of why they kept showing up over and over. He's talking about something that's definitive, and we're gonna do it, and it's happening.
And
The two are different.
That's what I'm trying to suggest the difference would be if you dealt with the CIP requests and approved them or didn't approve them
Then you're done.
by a motion or board action, then you're done dealing with them. And
But-
unless they're gonna be amended,
Right.
But you'll still see it in the budget, because
Right.
it's they're multi-year plans, so there'll still be a piece of it in each of the succeeding budgets to have the board review it and see if you're gonna continue with that project or stop that project and apply the money to
Unless you
something
amend
else.
Or go ahead and
That
do it
gets-
ahead of time.
And that gets to what we've been talking about, is some kind of a tracking mechanism, so, if year 3 comes along, and there's something else that the board, at the time, and maybe a different board, decides there's a different priority, and then take that money for something else, there needs to be some kind of a track showing that although that project is still going forward, it's not being funded for that year, or it's being reduced, and then you're starting over. But we're trying to figure out how that track would
So
work and would play.
If we decide to leave that wastewater generator in there and not do it, or not pay for it, and it stays in the budget, it should immediately get a cost center number, 591 or 592, whatever it is, blah, blah, blah. And even if you put a T or a P at the end of it, that it's temporary until the budget's actually approved. So then next year, when we look at that number, the 20,000 or 30 or whatever we would have allocated, would still be in there. It'd have a permanent number, and somewhere, some report would have a balance. We funded at 30,000 this year, so we only have 30 left. In most cases, these have been running more than just 2 years.
Well, basically what you need is you need a structure that you have in front of you, that such and such a generator was approved over 3 years, we're in year 2, this much is in there, this is what's yet to be funded, so you've got columns so you can look at it and see exactly where you are in terms of that funding process. And you know that you've got 1 year left or 2 years left to allocate to it unless you change your mind. And it goes down, down the schedule of priority in lieu of something else that comes up, or whatever that's more important in the board's opinion.
Am I mistaken, but the generator's already been funded, correct? You've been funding that? The generator, is that what you said?
No, it's gonna be
Okay.
funded over these years.
Okay, I
3 years,
thought-
funded over 3 years,
Okay.
so we're only talking about 1 year of the
Okay.
3-year funding.
it's been funded in the past, but we've
Yes.
used the money for
Correct.
something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
And there's no track of how that has occurred.
So if you can just picture a check register, it's just the same way that QuickBooks works. If you set up a loan amortization for your vehicle, or you've got your mortgage, or you've got a capital improvement of your parking lot to do, each checkbook, each register pertains to each project. So if you start funding it with 30,000 and you know your goal is 100,000, you know, when we put in there 2018, we're gonna put 30,000 in. And if the board decides to take 10 out to put it somewhere else, you're just debiting and crediting so that you've got, that's why I say a cost center, a chart of account number for each project.
I guess what would be nice when we decided we didn't want to spend the money on a generator that we have accumulated, that it took something more than just moving the money, that there was actually a budget
Right.
amendment involved in it, so
Kind of a
that you
track.
had a board decision and you had a hard documentation of why it was moved and the fact that it was moved and that that account is
That's
now
what we're
zero.
trying to get to. That's
It's a
what
little,
we're-
it's a little more complicated in the enterprise funds because there's so many moving parts. But when we did, the climbing structure, Alliance Field, that was a three-year funding project. And the way we tracked that was we tracked it in the budget narrative. So, you had in your budget narrative that it was year one of a three-year contribution, and it was being tracked separately. In the second year, you had, we're at the second year, we got this much aside, we need this. And then the third year, it was done, constructed. So, but that was in the narrative, the budget narrative, you had that track. It wasn't a document per se, it was just in the narrative, it was approved in such and such a year, we've been in year two, we've got this much set aside, and this much is being allocated this year for the purchase. So it's a much, the general fund's a much simpler way to do that because we don't have the number of projects per se, it's more just operational, other than recreation recently. But there's so many moving parts in the enterprise funds, it's been difficult because the board would periodically change direction in terms of what are we doing because of outside funding that might
As it
become
stands
available.
today, what projects do we have in wastewater that's besides the generator?
Well, he had, the whole list of things that were identified as projects, that Kirk was just mentioning, there was about 6 or 7 different projects, but those are long-term projects that were adopted in a long-term plan that he's been tracking in the plan, but we have not had a document per se that had all of those listed on the document and identified funded level where it's going forward and what the target date is. I think the closest was this year when we were setting specific dates that we wanted to do this in 2021, so we're backing it up.
I guess that's why I'm suggesting board action to approve a CIP request, because that documents that it's approved, and yes, it's gonna show up every time you have a budget until the money's been collected for it, but it can be documented that it's approved, and once the CIP request has been approved by board action, we don't need to see it again. I mean, if you're not gonna start funding it until 2020,
Yeah, you would,
that's fine, but it just gets put into the budget, and there it is, but we don't need to revisit the CIP with all the justification and all that, because it's already been approved, unless something's changed, unless we want to amend it, then it has to show up for an amendment.
But in the past, we have done that. We have approved it every year. It keeps, the wastewater improvement keeps showing up. It's the same thing, in repair and replacement, or whatever it's called.
Well, and where it's got us is we've got a whole bunch of money that we've collected for something that we use for something else, and the stuff we've been collecting it for still isn't done.
Right,
Right.
right, and that's what you're trying to avoid.
I'm trying to avoid that.
On there over and over. So what would be nice, in a perfect world, is if Lois had a laptop and had the budget in front of her, and could take that rate increase out and put the 60,000 out of there, take it out, and tell us what that number is. I don't think we can get it real quick, right, to answer your question.
Well, Kirk has to readjust his budget.
yep.
I mean, it's doable, it's just he's gonna have to,
And I
Really?
guess I can't believe we're looking at $100,000 to offset the rate increase and pay for the generator this year.
If you look at,
What was the amount of,
Sorry?
that you said? I'm talking to Randy. Richard, 88 cents?
94 cents.
94 cents.
94
Kirk.
cents? Okay.
I don't know how many gallons we're talking about to do a computation on that.
Just take your 94 cents times your
But this
gallons.
year, It's only $70,000.
Treated.
Sales.
And it's an increase?
So, 70,000. 952, so you know, you're 50,000 short of the million.
Well, it's not just, excuse me, it's not just sales. Sales is only the volume.
Yeah.
You've also got the fixed, that
Your
shows.
base rate.
Fixed cost, and, yeah.
Fixed and base.
Okay,
So they're crunching those numbers
Yep.
as we speak.
it's $66,035
Is what we would have to pull out of that.
assuming that my estimate was correct on sales. But it would be the sales number, correct?
Okay.
So that's saying we could,
$66,000.
Write a check for the-
So you pull $126,000 out of the total under the fund balances and move it to offset the rate increase and to pay for the lift station generator. And be done with it, and we wouldn't have any rate increase in wastewater.
yeah.
That seems like a more than reasonable thing to me to do when you consider how much money's sitting there.
And also, it's all based on sales. If we have a good year in sales, it might not even be that much of a difference.
That's
It's
true.
all, as I would say, a crapshoot.
Well, there are a number of factors, and, the weather is certainly one of the major factors in terms of sales. If you have a cool, wet spring and summer, you're not gonna have sales. If you have a dry, like we did in July, you saw what happened in July. We tripled the sales in the month of July because it was hot and dry. Now, people were watering lawns and, all kinds of things.
That refers to water, but not
Yeah.
wastewater.
Well, it's
Well,
related.
same thing.
because
It's
you-
related because the water goes into the wastewater system. Some, not all of it, obviously,
That's
but,
how you
some
track
of
it.
it does.
Still based on sales.
I don't have a problem with what Dave is stating and moving forward with it like that. If the problem, in 6 months from now, we can kind of see where we're going with it too.
Well, if we were running close here, but
Well, I know we're not running close, but I mean.
we're not even running close.
And the estimates that we were talking about is possibly utilizing a 3 or a 5 year, historical view to do our estimates, to get the peaks and the valleys and things such as that. The forecast is to be wetter and, going forward, over the years, basically, cooler and wetter, so we'll see where it goes. It's a guess. It's
Well,
an estimate.
I think it's reasonable to leave the rate where it is this year, but I do agree with the manager, the board has to come up with a comfort level of what the appropriate fund balance should be.
I think the board has to come up with that based on the manager's recommendation.
Yeah, and we do have a history. We can go back and generate a history. We know approximately what the cycles are in terms of really cold winters and mild winters and, hot summers and dry summers and wet summers. We can go back and generate basically a trend line and use that for estimating to come up with what you feel a
How
comfort
much of
level
a
would
balance you
be.
need there?
Yeah?
What would you call that balance? It's not an operational reserve.
No, it's not an operational reserve. That would be a true contingency type of an account. You
Your
don't
actual
wanna-
cost, though.
Well, it's your, I'm trying to remember what the auditor called it when he suggested, for the general fund, but it's your true, responsive, that's your comfort level to respond to, particularly the areas that cannot go down, water and sewer. Same thing with fire. Those 3 areas, water, sewer, and fire, have to be up and functioning all the time, because that is your primary responsibility, health, safety, and welfare to the residents. The township hall and the community center can close for weeks at a time, and it's really not gonna create any havoc for anybody, as long as the water comes out of the tap and their toilet takes it away, and, and if something happens, emergency services responds.
I come across a note last night, was to ask you about, for the last 4 or 5 years, whatever amount of years, what is our cost of emergencies for the last 5, 6 years or whatever?
Well, that's what we're talking about right
Yeah.
now, right?
Yeah.
But I know, but that's what that way you give us some kind of a guide.
It would
well-
be nice to see a recommendation on that, so the board could make a.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. We have those historic trend data. We can go back, over budget cycles. We can go back and identify, what occurred and what led to the budget decisions that were being made. So, that's just labor is all that is. I mean, it's, the
And that
data's
nu-
there.
That number should be a real contingency account. That's what that should be, so that we know, because I know we've gone back and forth, we'll take it out of contingency or add it in there or change that.
Well, yeah,
We should have it be, whatever that number is, make that,
There are actual terms in the chart of accounts in terms of how that goes, but what you're talking about is the real emergency fund,
Right.
the unanticipated event fund that,
or call it emergency fund.
well, it's like California, Malibu, it's that
yeah,
kind
you
of a
would do
thing.
that.
I mean, it's something that you don't have time to get outside funding for, there's not grants that can be, it's like today, we have to do this.
Yeah, but I don't think you could ever save enough money for that.
No, but I mean, it's that kind of an event, something that like this morning it was 16 degrees, we don't have any snow cover on the ground. What if we had, mains freeze? I mean, those are the kinds of things that we're really talking about, things that are not really plannable, that just happen, but you have to be ready to respond to. And what level of comfort do you have? Do you need 500,000? Do you need 300,000? Do you think, based on prior events, what's the average, to get you by? And that's all you're talking about, is to get you by until either, the last time it happened, the state came forward and gave us 100,000 to offset some of the cost. Prior time before that, when it was weeks at a time that it froze, FEMA came in and, replaced funds, but it took months for those funds to come back in. In the meantime, you need to continue to operate. So that's kind of what we're talking about, that the true emergency type of response, emergency response fund, or, however you want to frame it.
Kurt knows about where the problem areas are, with the
Well, we
depth of
do.
the pipe and stuff like that.
Well, and
how many
realistic-
we got and stuff like that.
And realistically, our threat is decreasing, because as those things have happened, we've
Correct.
addressed them. And, the last time when we had the serious freezing, all of those pipes that were excavated were insulated, or put deeper, so it's less likely that that's going to occur again. New construction is being done a little bit differently, so those things are potentially going to decrease, but they're still going to be, still have aging infrastructure in some areas. It's not old by any stretch of the imagination, but it is aging every
Yeah.
year.
Well, and I think rather than set that on anybody's idea what the worst-case scenario would be, you need to set it on hard fact. And
That's it.
The manager's
What's
right.
the
You need to go
history?
back and look at it for the last 10 years and what kind of emergencies have come up and what kind of funds have we needed.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to set it to match some of that stuff, so that,
Sure.
and I think it's gonna come up way short of $1.5 million.
Oh, I suspect that it will. There's no question about that. I mean,
So you want roughly
that's
10
a large
years?
amount.
You think that's a good number?
Oh, I think that's a decent time frame to try and
Whatever the manager's
create
gonna recommend.
create a trend.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's not my job.
yeah, we can create a trend, I mean, that's certainly a reasonable period of time. I mean, they make political projections based on 600 voters out of the state, so I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that'd give you a relatively decent, cycle type of a look to see. When was it we had that really ugly freeze? That was, what?
Last was 2014.
2014? Well, the one before that where everything froze up for weeks, when was
It was
that?
2000.
That was 20 years prior.
That was 20 years. Okay, but see, there you go. It's a 20-year time frame. From 20 years up to 2014, we didn't have that major freeze, and then we had one in 2014. So, yeah, I think if you look back 10 years and tried to get a concept of what the financial impact of those events was, and then apply that to current conditions.
So we kind of decided, if I wrote this down right, that the water 3-month reserve was somewhere around 300,000. Would that be a good number?
Well, let's stick with wastewater.
Well, I want to make sure we have both, and that's what I'm going to ask, is do we have a rough
Goes
idea
right
for
into my next
wastewater?
comment.
Yeah, let's see, Lois calculated those.
So if we need 300,000 for water,
Well, I've been
number for wastewater?
nagging the manager for the last week to get me some of these numbers. And what he come up with is he come up with the 3 months operating expenses from 2015 all the way through 2018. And then I took the liberty of averaging them for a number, and a general fund comes up to be a 4-year average for a 3-month operational reserve is 409,000 and change. And the fire fund, which I think is one of the operating funds, so that 4-year average for 3-month operating is 122, almost $123,000. The wastewater fund is 177,691. The water
Is that
fund,
3 month?
that's 3 months.
Average.
Average.
It's a 4-year average for 3 months.
So the 409 was not wastewater, it was water?
No, the 409 was general fund.
Oh, general, okay.
Yeah, what Dave's
Water
looking
came
at
up
is
to
this,
be,
this email that you got on November 12th that Lowe's had put together.
the water, the 4-year average for 3 months operating is 171,625. And then the solid waste 4-year average for 3-month operating is 85,583. The information I got from the manager is that those are the operating funds, those are the things that we spend money on,
Right.
whether we've got the doors open or not, so.
Can you tell me
That's
again
not
what
maintenance,
wastewater
though.
was? Was that 177?
Sure, wastewater was, the 4-year average 3-month operating is 177,691. And I would think that it would be proper management to, if it takes a motion, then have a motion that establishes those funds to be accumulated, maintained, and restored as they're used. But they need to be under a separate account someplace or a separate number so that, and my reason being is that so it takes board action for a budget amendment to use those funds, but so that there's documentation that those funds got used and what they were used for. That's the only way you have documentation of all that stuff.
Right.
Other than that, it's just everybody's memory of what happened.
And those basically, for those are continuation funds, basically. If there's some kind of an interruption in your revenue stream, those are the funds that would be used to continue operations.
Well, we called those, the last meeting, we're gonna call those operational reserves, right? Then the only thing we need to determine is what the contingency amount is that we need for each one of those funds.
That's the manager's recommendation.
Yeah,
And those, and those funds basically would have to, increase by probably the same kind of a factor that we use for the collective bargaining, because from year to year, you're gonna have roll-up costs.
and is the contingency funds, I understand that they're based on a percentage of the budget for that year, in theory. True?
That's what I've been doing, yes.
The auditors do it that way.
Yeah, the auditors do it that way, and basically what we do is we look at it annually in the budget process. You'll see that it's the final result, basically. It's, you've got the revenue, anticipated revenue over the anticipated expenditures gives you an amount that is generally recommended either to go towards paying off something or going into the general fund.
When we go through the process of, the contingency fund is part of the budget every year, correct?
And water and wastewater.
And that's it?
I don't have a contingency fund and general fund.
Okay. That would be my other comment then, is that based on the manager's recommendation, we should establish what that contingency fund is, and we should do the same thing. Those monies should be accumulated, maintained, and replaced when we use them.
So are you not calling the contingency fund the emergency?
The operational reserve?
Well,
The reserve is separate.
you've got two different things that you're talking about. The way we've been using contingency fund is within a budget like water and wastewater for day-to-day miscalculations of what expense might be or what revenue might be. Those are the funds that are used to adjust the budget as it goes along. The emergency reserves we're talking about are hands-off. Those are not used unless we have some kind of an unanticipated emergency that exceeds the budget, exceeds our ability to manage.
I guess
the
that's what
budget.
I'm
That's in
kind of,
addition to the operational reserves.
Correct.
what I'm kind of suggesting is that the contingency is kind of fluid, and you have more bills going out this month than you have revenues coming in, so you borrow
Right.
some contingency to take care of that, and then you replace it when the funds come in.
Correct.
That's contingency fund.
Well, and you think about some of the budget amendments we've had, and that's what it is, you know.
And the emergency fund, I think the only place we're really looking at that is
Fund balance.
water and wastewater, right?
Well, and that's the 3-month operational reserve for the.
No, I mean the
general-
emergency funds.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yes,
Separate.
That's a
Yes.
separate amount of money because those are some high-cost
Correct.
items, correct?
correct.
But even the emergency fund, I guess I'm suggesting that be established at an amount and
That's
that it,
based on the 10-year,
based on.
Well, in the,
Take for
Whatever number.
recommendation, whatever number we come up with.
Right.
and in the enterprise
That
funds,
should be an account that takes board action to get into it. I mean, the
Should be a
manager
restricted
always
account.
has the authority to go in and take those funds if he needs it because something come up this morning. But all he has to do is come back and the board still has to make a budget.
well, he still has
And-
Gotta
a,
approve it. That's
still
But
has a
in-
level that he can spend at the
right,
stadium.
in terms of the enterprise funds, those would be restricted funds. I mean, those would show, you know, as a set-aside restricted fund specifically for emergency response.
Right, but it'd be specific to each one of the
Correct.
wastewater and the water
Yes,
funds.
yeah, but they would show on the treasurer's reports as restricted funds.
Well, and that's what I was looking for,
You want another,
not here.
Well, that gets back down to my last question, is on the treasurer's report, we could have a couple lines below that total.
Correct.
That subtract out the operational reserve and take out the contingency if it's not part of the budget,
Then you gotta. vote it
and
out.
take out the emergency funds, so that the bottom line number, the net total in wastewater, for example, is not 1.5. It's something less than that after you take out
Right.
the operational reserve and the contingency and the emergency.
Well, and see, all these are added too, to get to that, where that's exactly what I asked for years ago, and I couldn't seem to get that across to what I was looking for, that you should have a balance.
of availability.
Backwards, yeah. Yeah.
Well, it's just a matter of
Because
taking it off
investments are.
the totals and just working your way backwards on the
Just
bottom of that
subtract it
sheet.
down.
Exactly.
So that you've got a net total.
Exactly.
We'll have to work with Lois to get those figures in that, for a minute, because we don't have them in the treasurer's area.
Well, I don't think that's a complicated process to do that, you know, once you define what it is that
Once you
that
define
want
your
to do.
number, then you just subtract it out.
Because, you know, over the years, I mean, and Randy, well, and Ernie too, you guys have been, you know, board after board after board over a number of years. There's always the discussion about what's miscellaneous and what's contingency, always. And it's terminology. It's basically what you define it as in the budget document and in the process. So, you know, so there's a functional definition, you know, you know, Kirk has contingency funds built in, and those are the funds, you know, as Dave was suggesting, that, you know, if you're short this period, the money's not coming in yet, you take from the contingency funds and you pay it back. In the general fund, I have, in each of the general fund line items, I have a very small miscellaneous. You know, as for instance, in the governmental, general support, miscellaneous in there is for tax tribunal hearings. You know, but that's identified in the narrative, that that's what that's for. It's identified in the budget that that's what that's for. But otherwise, it's like $250 or something like that in each of the departments, because you've got sometimes small types of things that come up that weren't anticipated or whatever, and that's what that is a true miscellaneous type of
That would be a
fund.
budgeted item every year.
Budgeted every year.
As opposed to
Right.
operational reserve, which is a fund that we have set in there.
You know, as a, for instance, every one of the departments in the general fund has a miscellaneous $250 for computer stuff. You know, you have a glitch in your computer, you have to call 906 to come over, it, you know, comes out of that fund. You know, so sometimes you use it, sometimes you don't.
And I guess what I would suggest is once we set that operational reserve and you base it on something like a 4-year average, then your annual adjustment to that isn't as much.
No, it'd be relatively
If you're
small.
using a rolling 4-year average, then the adjustment's gonna be relatively small and it's easy to do.
Yeah, and basically what that would be tied to would be, you know, the economy, you know. I mean, what is that? Is that $430,000 worth more this year than it was last year, or less than what it was last year? And that's how you make your adjustment, basically, to keep that spending power at a level, you know, level spending power. So you don't find yourself in a spot where you've you know, for 20 years, you've put 400, you know, you've kept 400,000 in, and then when we actually do have an event, it's 600,000, you know, because the costs have gone high.
So are we thinking that we wanna have all of this stuff set up before we approve the budget?
I don't think you have to
Time
do
for
that.
Or-
You know,
Okay, that's
I
what I
mean,
wanna know.
almost the middle of November.
For a
have a
budget.
consensus of what we want to accomplish.
The only thing that actually affects the budget is what are you gonna do about the rate increase if you want
Correct.
to pull that out of that fund balance in wastewater?
Right, so we wanna,
That's just a budget
we
adjustment.
Yeah,
wanna
that-
spend the
and that-
60,000 or whatever that number is for, out of wastewater.
That
from
would be my
the
suggestion.
reserves.
Yeah, if your direction from this meeting to Kirk is to make it be no increase and take the money from the, you know, the fund balance to do that, then all he has to do is do the calculation and make the adjustment, change his budget, and bring it back to you for approval.
But then don't change, and I know we did this once before, and we asked him to change things a couple weeks ago. He went back and he made other alterations, and
Well-
we don't want that, right?
Well,
We
you have
just-
to
Well,
make
but you have to,
No,
because.
because he changed his sales then, and that's.
No, I haven't
that's
changed sales.
The time before when we asked, you said you did.
But see, all of those,
You said you
All
made
of those-
other
but
adjustments.
see, all of those elements within that budget are affected by a dollar change. You know, if you're gonna pull, just a round number, if you're gonna pull 60,000 out of that 1.4 to put it in, that's got to be spread over where's it gonna go? You know, where's that gonna go to get to zero?
Right.
It's got to be spread over, so it's gonna change wages, it's gonna change a variety of things.
I see what you're saying.
So
And
the-
that's really
so his
not-
whole-
I don't
His
think-
whole document doesn't just change, but the net effect is zero increase.
And it's if we say the policy, we want no rate increase, then it's up to the superintendent of public works to change the budget accordingly. It's not our business to change the budget.
Yeah, it's coming, the money is coming from here, so take that money and spread it on your budget to ensure that you have a zero increase in
Net.
rates.
So then, if you have to affect sales, it's going to affect the water budget. And that's what I'm trying to say, is we need to
Yes,
take
so
the
you're not
money.
affecting sales, you're affecting costs.
Right,
Yeah.
that's what I want to make sure, okay.
But the costs are gonna be spread throughout his
It's not
budget.
gonna affect the
Okay.
sales, no.
One of the things I got here is when we were doing wastewater, we initially considered 6 CIP items. We approved one, the generator.
Right.
And I would hope that we could come back to the board meeting with a new CIP request that reflects where those funds are coming from, that it's coming out of the fund balance.
So what
For
you're
that
saying is
generator.
take that whole 60,000 out of the fund
That
balance.
was my suggestion, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, that's
We
what I
should
was.
have a new CIP request that shows that coming out of the fund balance as.
One-year
opposed to being
expenditure.
Accrued,
Okay,
and the board should approve that based on the information that's presented in the CIP
That-
request, and that puts that
No.
to an end.
1 year.
That can happen in
funded-
January.
funded all in
Doesn't have to happen now.
2019.
no.
Well, it has to
Well, I
happen.
get
as
that.
part of
They
the
wanna-
budget,
they
otherwise
wanna
you're
do the
gonna approve
generator.
CIP
They
request
wanna leave
based
the
on
rest the same.
amortization.
Yep.
And when he redoes
All the other stuff, I don't have a clue.
The budget, it'll be in there.
Yeah.
That's what
I'm just
trying to
stating, we've done
clarify.
projects before where we've approved it at a board meeting, you know.
Actually, every project that's ever been done has been approved by the board,
Right.
whether or not it's in the CIP or
Yeah.
wherever.
Yeah, the board has to act on it.
I guess I'm just suggesting that we keep it to a board action so
Yeah.
that we have documentation that we did
Well,
that.
we always do, because we have to approve it.
And we'd like to know where it's coming from. If
It's
you
just
take it out of
sometimes it's
account,
not in the
where it's going.
CIP, that's what you're saying.
I just have a
Right, and it should be.
Well,
question, another one, this is kind of for Kurt, it has to do with the treatment plant. Reading the minutes from the meetings there, Kurt, they keep talking about they're up to 150, 160%, revenue is up 160%, 170%. What are they doing with the excess revenue over there? That's the question I have, because when you look at our cost for flow cost and man costs and that, you're talking about increasing that. And if they're 160, 170% revenue up,
No, you're talking about it's, every every month, there's like a budget report, basically. So you got the budget number, then you got the actual. So, you know, in 3 months, normally your budget would be 3/12, right?
But what I'm
It might
saying-
be more, it might be less, that's all that is. And
But
we do have a
reading-
reserve account, a
But
reserve
reading the
capital
minutes,
account.
but reading the minutes, for
Yeah.
the year, they said they were up 150 to 160% on revenue for the year.
Last year.
The current year.
I think that
current
was
year.
one line item, not all the revenue.
It's called revenue in the minutes. That
It's
was the
called
revenue.
Other revenue, I think you're referring to.
They didn't say that, just said revenue. So if revenue's up, because we're probably gonna have a additional cost from them because their auditors are going through it now. We've had some major costs come back to us because of, once the auditors go through. And we didn't pay enough for whatever reason, so.
Well, right, yeah, because the agreement says, you know, we do a budget, okay? If that's, but, and all a budget is, everybody has the same, it's an estimate, okay? But if it's a different number, you know, we either get money back or, you know, we have to pay more, once a year.
I'm not seeing us getting any money back, but they could. But what I'm saying is
Yeah.
their minutes kept saying that their revenue is up 150, 160, 170%.
Yeah.
So the question I have is, where is that money going? And that's for the year. And their year is now over with in that. Their year is through October 31st, the same as the city, is it not? In that.
You know what, I'll have to look into that.
I'm repeating just, I'm right from the minutes of the
Which minutes are you talking about? The last minutes?
last two
That have been
minutes.
reported? Okay. It said the same thing twice?
It was a different percent, not much, but there was different percent. They keep referring to their over revenue by this much.
Okay, I'll take a look.
So Dave, I think what you're looking for is you're looking for a new page, in essence, for the board to consider in the budget that only has that one CIP project on it.
Yeah.
For the board to act
And
on.
just, and all we'd be adjusting in that CIP request is where the money's coming from.
For the
And
one.
that it's coming this year.
Okay.
Okay, well, the only problem I've got is I am required by regulation I gotta have a 20-year CIP. Okay. So you're saying we're never gonna fund any CIP except piecemeal when you feel like it?
No, what Dave is saying is for this year, we're only funding the one project. So
Okay,
we
so
need to-
this
We
year.
need to see a page for this year that shows only that generator project being funded fully this year.
Okay,
But then next year in the CIP process, you can come back with all of those projects laid out, but with more documentation to support the
Okay.
projects.
Right.
all right, gotcha.
And hopefully we'd start looking at them a whole lot earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, you should start looking at the CIP right after you adopt this budget.
Yeah.
Okay, I have it says revenue sheet
I
other.
got it too.
So it basically trucked wastewater revenue will help offset line items that are over budget. So that's what it is. It's trucked wastewater.
Yeah, it's other revenue,
Revenue's higher
Which is
than
pretty
anticipated at
small.
168.8%.
amount in the budget.
So it's not overall, it's just that one line
One
item. Trucked wastewater revenue. That's what it is, which isn't, I don't
I'll have to
know.
go back and read that, because I didn't read that.
I got it right here.
Because the revenue comes from the
I
three
mean,
owners.
multiple sources.
Right. There's other revenue that comes from other sources. Truck wastewater is basically a couple of places. Truck wastewater that's contaminated, like the railway yards, for example. When they wash their engines, okay, it can't go into a drain. So they truck it well, it goes into a drain, but it's collected, trucked to the wastewater plant. That's other revenue.
All right, so I want to just make sure everybody knows what we're looking for. We are expecting are you asking that the 60,000, even though we're going to just go ahead and fund it, be shown up separately as a CIP item that'll be funded this year?
And the only thing I'm suggesting is that the CIP request that we have reflects where the money's coming from and that we're gonna do it this year.
Okay. Does that make sense, Kurt? Okay.
Sure.
Then we're going to look at a number from Randy asking for emergency fund balance for roughly 10 years.
Yeah,
We
which
don't
really
have to
doesn't have
have
anything to do
that.
with the budget, but.
Right, we don't have to have
Right.
that right now. And the 3-month reserve, you've got those rough numbers, we can look at that next year too. What else? What else are we directing, other than,
Just establishing the contingency for each one of those funds. What the contingency amount should be for each one of those funds.
those are the, in addition to the operational, you're saying?
Yeah, the operational reserve is 3 months operating.
Right?
The
And then you have
contingency
on
is
each
an
one of them.
established amount that becomes fluid. It goes back and forth into the budget as you need it to offset some late payments.
Right, but
And then
we
the-
don't have one in general, or
well,
we have one in fire and the rest?
We have,
Those-
it's in
those
the
are
budget.
only- Those are only in the enterprise funds.
Right.
It's
that's what
in
I'm-
wastewater and water then, is the only
Right.
place they have the reserve, or the
So you just-
contingency.
We already have one in fire, and then you want the 3 utilities.
And I'm suggesting that the 5 operational funds should all have some contingency money in them.
Well, Randy's saying that the general fund doesn't have it, he's got it as miscellaneous.
You got a different term, basically.
I don't have contingency in mind. I've got the budget, the
The-
budget. The budget is the budget. I don't have a contingency fund in there.
But we would have an emergency reserve set
That's
up.
general fund,
In
fund
the general
balance.
fund.
Yeah, that's my fund balance, is my emergency fund. Yeah, because we have things that come up that are not budgeted, that we need to do, and it comes out of the general fund.
But then water, fire, water, solid waste, and wastewater would all have contingencies, which they do, is what you're saying, Dave, right?
Yeah.
Yep,
The
those
only
are
question I've got is in your fund balance. You're talking the $921,531?
Well, that's everything, yeah.
Yeah, that's fund balance, right?
Yep.
So
Yep,
what
the
would come out of
The
that?
operating would be out of that.
The 409?
The
emergency
4-month.
fund?
Yeah, the 4-month operating would come out of that.
3 months.
Four
Actually,
for
we
general
said
fund.
4 for general fund and 3 for the others.
Okay.
Okay. And on his wastewater section, budget section with the adjustments, right?
increase.
No increase,
Yep.
right?
And the funds to make that happen come out of that 1.5 or whatever it is.
Right.
Okay, that sheet you sent out, Randy, with all the 2015 to 2018 funds?
Yes.
Okay, and general fund there, you show 3 months. That's what that form.
Oh, I know, yeah, Lois did that on a 3-month, but it's actually a 4-month.
Okay, so it's gonna be more than that $409,000.
A little bit, yeah. It's about 420 roughly.
Okay. Is that it for discussion on wastewater? Kind of have a consensus on water. We kind of have a consensus on everything else.
I think we're done.
You wanna,
Well, if you can just
I'm not rushing you, I'm just trying to
take a look at
eliminate.
the water yet, and that same fund balances, we don't have the issue with water that we had in,
No, we don't.
because the water only shows 612,000 total.
What are you looking at? Oh. the
That
balances.
treasurer's report for balances.
That needs to be built up somewhat.
Correct.
Talking about the water now.
Yeah.
We are slowly recovering that.
We used most of that at Vanderbilt really took a hit on that.
Yes.
But the same thing we're considering for wastewater, we're considering for the water, is we're gonna
Correct.
establish a 3-month operational reserve, and we're gonna establish a contingency, which is already in the budget, correct?
Well, there is a contingency fund in the budget, yes.
And then we're gonna establish an emergency fund.
Correct.
Which is gonna be a number recommended by the manager.
For water.
That operational reserve?
Oh, it's
No,
separate.
operational reserve is 3 months,
Right.
but in addition to the operational reserve, we were talking about
Emergency fund.
an emergency fund of some amount determined by the manager and recommended to the board.
We're gonna look back over 10 years and come up with a trend.
We really have 2 of them sitting there.
Correct. Separately identified.
Actually, 3, if you look at the, because we're talking about the contingency too, it's already in there. But we wanna probably look at it again and see if that's what number we're looking at, or percent of the budget or whatever.
Well, I guess in my opinion, if the contingency works, it's in the budget, I would think we just leave that alone if that works. The only thing I'd be looking to add would be to actually determine what that operational reserve is and determine what the emergency reserve is.
It may take a while to build those up to what we think they should be.
Yep.
And that's probably gonna be something that would be outside of this budget process. It's something we're gonna have to go back and calculate and bring to you, and then you would establish that by board policy. I mean, you would set those as your guidelines.
Yeah, I'd like to have a meeting in January, February to kind of pull this together beforehand of, you know, June even.
You could actually float a loan from a fund that has a lot of money in it.
Yeah, we need
We've
to-
done that before.
We need to get.
Out of where?
Yeah, figure out how, if we're gonna pay some of that back too.
Well, then while we're establishing it, we could actually just be paying back the fund we borrowed it from.
Yeah.
Which we're doing right now.
Well, that is gonna be a discussion the board will have to have with regard to stormwater. You know, is the township going to go forward with establishing a stormwater utility? And if the answer is no, then that 40,000 needs to go back into wastewater.
And the planning commission does have that on their agenda
Yep.
for tomorrow.
Oh,
And realistically, if the ordinance is amended to go in the direction we spoke with the road commission about, there really shouldn't be a cost
Correct.
to us, because if the road commission would then do what they need to do under their ordinance, and if the property owner failed to meet their obligations, then it would go on the tax roll.
Yeah, I think it's gonna end up to be a big education process before you actually enact something
Absolutely.
like that.
Yeah.
yeah, that's gonna be new development anyway.
What a surprise.
And we've already changed our process in terms of issuing the zoning compliance. You have to present the permit from the road commission before it'll be considered.
Yep.
Are we doing anything so far to get that to the road commission? You know, I mentioned about like a canary sheet, whatever form that they fill out, residential fills out.
Oh,
give them a
it's,
copy.
What was-
no, it's, we won't have to do that. Basically, what it amounts to is if somebody brings in a request, they're gonna be sent to the road commission, and the request won't be accepted unless they bring back a permit.
Okay, that's easier to get.
Yep. That way, that's one less record that we have to maintain.
Mhm.
Well, I'm already doing that in water and sewer. If somebody comes in and they want a water and/or sewer permit, connection permit, they will not issue a permit until they show the right-of-way permit.
Correct. Same structure.
And every other permit that they're required to get.
That's commercial or residential or both?
Everybody.
Both.
Because water is
If they're-
a consensus.
Building on a right-of-way, which
And you put
everybody
water.
is.
Water's fine
So
with me.
water- Water's good, wastewater's good.
Solid waste,
Yeah, Ernie was asking about solid waste.
that's actually a decrease, I believe. Or no change, I guess, no change.
There is going to be a meeting, I'm pretty sure I forwarded to you, and apparently it's not the same meeting we were talking about with the Solid Waste Authority. We were talking about getting together with them, and apparently they're putting a different meeting together. Talk about probably a millage for this new equipment. So if I didn't email it to you, I'll check.
Oh, you did. I got it.
I'll forward that to you again.
I thought they were going to utilize their not contributing to fund their improvements.
They're what?
Their,
75 cents?
yeah,
No, they want a millage.
No, that's going to their capital.
Yeah, it's going into their capital account.
how was their equipment capital?
Yeah.
Well, anyways, we got, our budget is no change.
That's what the mills should be.
No change in solid waste.
The mills should be for equipment.
Actually, that,
We're gonna get
we're
tipping
cheaper
fees.
than most other places.
Isn't the tipping fee going up?
Yeah,
Now, the
That's in
tipping,
there.
Tipping fee is. yeah.
tipping fee went up, but does that, we don't really cover that?
No,
That
we
goes,
don't.
that's the commercial covers that. That's not a cost to us.
Yep.
So stormwater.
Yeah, $49.50 a ton.
library fund.
Well, we do for, you know, the contractor that hauls all the non-commercial. We do pay the tipping fee. So that's included. But you're right about the commercial. The commercial pays their own tipping.
You're recommending no increase in solid waste, right, Kirk, for the
Right.
residential?
Because like I say, I did include the increase that they're already proposing, or
There it
actually, it's
is.
already passed. So,
Where that, with that increase, where will that leave us then? We've got $224,000 sitting in solid waste, and we've got 200 and some $1,000 out of general fund. It was, to do solid waste too, so we've gotten over $400,000 sitting in solid waste and that.
Plus what we're sending
and
them.
that's why I'm not raising the rates. And
I'm talking about the individual.
200,000, I don't have yet. It's due.
That's a payment, that's due.
It's payable.
Pay the
It's from the
judge.
general fund that needs to be paid back over time.
And we got $26,000 coming from a grant once we get that, so that's gonna increase it too.
You're not suggesting that we would lower the rates and use up some of that money?
I'm thinking that's what I'm saying in that too.
Well, I would recommend we keep it where it's at, because again, closure cost, you don't know when that's gonna happen. We're gonna get hit with some of that,
That's probably another whole discussion.
but
But part of that money we're paying for dumpage was going to closure.
We're paying twice,
Yeah,
I
this
think.
is-
Yeah, we are paying twice for
This is
closure.
over and above that, right? The 224 you're talking about? Yeah.
well, I think we keep it where it's at and go forward.
Well, we'll see what they're gonna end up charging us if they do a millage. It's millions of dollars worth of equipment to do the single stream. So we could wait until, see where that goes. But that meeting is next month.
December 12th.
They're gonna try to do it in their own facility.
Well, that's what the equipment's gonna be. Well, it is gonna cost, there's no doubt about that. And we used to have single screen, because we had, because the county was not doing the recycling at that time. So basically, we had to pay the hauling to get it to Spread Eagle, I think it is, Wisconsin.
We had to or through the solid waste.
We did.
We didn't pay the solid waste because it wasn't going to their landfill. But it cost us to take it to Spread Eagle, where it was, they've got single stream recycling there. In fact, that contractor, that owner of that facility was one of the 3 bidders for
Yeah.
the city,
Didn't get it.
right, didn't get it. Because he wasn't considered local, although he was from Wisconsin. So it went to Waste Management, who's not, I wouldn't call them local.
Wouldn't call them local either, but
They do have a facility here.
For a while.
it's never open.
Right.
It'll be the, end up to be the west wing.
Good luck talking to him
Anything else anybody
by
wants
phone.
to
It's impossible.
discuss?
Or you can talk to somebody, but they're, God knows where they are.
I apologize for being late.
Should.
Well, if I'm doing this right, an average utility bill with a $4,000 or 4,000 gallon use a month, we'll only see a $12.40 increase for the year. I don't think that's unreasonable.
$1 a month.
I think that's a good job.
Okay, well, you don't know what the effect will be on the electric system. But you're saying because the rate won't go up, you're using that
Yes.
number?
I have the water increases in there with the dollar base and the 10-cent increase per 1,000 gallons. No increase in wastewater, no increase in solid waste, and the debt service remains the same. It's a $12.60 year increase for a 4,000 gallon month user.
What is it, 2 more years we have to talk to the city?
I don't think we can do any better than that.
The study will be done in
Now,
20. isn't
how do you
it?
get a
Isn't
dollar a
that
month?
The next rate study?
Well, base rate, the base rate's
I'm
going
just talking about the
24,
base
21.
rate.
for water.
Yeah, because you got the monthly fee that's going up from $7 to $8 too.
Yeah, that's $1.10 for the base rate per month. So I wouldn't have a problem with that.
So it's going up $1.40 for the average user.
Correct. Can you live with that?
I can.
I'm not gonna argue over $1.40. I'm sorry, I will leave if we're gonna argue over $1.40. I will leave. The clerk's putting his foot down on that one. I'm grandstanding.
So where are we at now?
I think we have consensus.
As we get to the board meeting.
We might have some questions in the
I think
meantime.
a lot of the answers or questions were asked. and
We have a
answered.
direction for
The only thing we
next
need to
year.
see for the board meeting is we need to see that new CIP request for wastewater.
So, Mr. Manager, do you have
Which
it?
board meeting we talking about?
In December?
Probably the first meeting in
You don't need a
December.
whole, you don't need an entire consensus budget.
Yeah,
We'll have to put together an entire consensus budget, but yes, that page would be in that consensus budget.
And when you approve the budget, that would be approved also. But it can be by that or a separate board action.
I'm gonna push for a separate board action to approve CIP request.
So, my understanding of where we are right now, we're at a consensus budget with what Kirk had submitted as his budget the last time, now modified for a 0 increase
In wastewater.
in wastewater, coming out of the overall contingency fund, the reserve fund. And then other than that, everything else is set. We got yet a new page on the wastewater CIP.
And the narrative.
And a new page on the water as well, because you took several off of the water. So you need those 2 new pages showing what we're actually
The
doing.
and the wastewater narrative will change, it's showing no increase.
Okay.
So you have that, Mr. Manager?
I do. And then, so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and put that together, and I'll use those figures to get the notice of public hearing out to the Mining Journal by the 20th. That gives them time to get it formed and run at least 7 days before the public hearing takes place.
The public hearing will be the first meeting in December.
That's the target, which is the 4th.
So we will approve the budget, the fee schedule, and the budget resolution.
Correct.
3 items.
And taxes.
And the yeah, there was, the taxes. The
Truth
tax
and
levy.
Truth and taxation levy will be
So there's-
on that as well.
Yeah, there's 3 actions we'll have to do. Truth and taxation, the budget, and the fee schedule.
Correct.
Be it for the meeting on the 4th.
Fee schedule's gonna have to change too.
Yes.
can we just get the pages that are changing?
Well, that
rather
part
than
won't change.
Running this whole thing? Well, I mean, we
Well,
don't
yeah,
need to
you're gonna
rerun
have
the
to
whole
change
budget.
the,
No, just
zero-
change,
zero,
yeah.
I'll have to change it back to the way it was.
Yeah,
One number.
yep.
Okay,
Cool.
I think we're done with.
I think so. 2:35.
Got it.